The sledgehammer crashed through the concrete as Sarah demolished her own pool, each strike echoing like thunder through the suburban morning. Behind her fence, Karen's voice rose to a shriek, "This is destroying my property value. I'm calling the police." But what Karen didn't know was that Sarah had already called someone else, someone with the power to turn Karen's perfect neighborhood reign into her worst nightmare. As the sirens wailed in the distance, Sarah smiled, knowing the real demolition was just beginning. The sledgehammer felt heavier than Sarah Martinez had expected, its steel head catching the early morning sunlight as she raised it above her head. Sweat already beaded on her forehead despite the cool October air, but she wasn't backing down now. Not after 3 years of hell. "This is for my sanity," she whispered, bringing the hammer down with everything she had. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms as concrete exploded in a satisfying spray of dust and debris. The sound echoed across the quiet cul-de-sac like a gunshot, and Sarah couldn't help but grin. She'd been planning this moment for months, ever since the final straw that broke her patience clean in half. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The screech came from directly behind the 6-foot privacy fence that separated her backyard from her neighbor's meticulously manicured paradise. Sarah didn't need to see through the wooden slats to know that Karen Hoffman was probably standing there in her pristine white robe, her bottle blonde hair already styled even though it wasn't even 7 in the morning. Sarah raised the sledgehammer again. "Removing my pool, Karen. On my own property. You can't just destroy a pool. There are regulations. Permits. You're going to flood my basement." Another swing. Another satisfying crash. More dust clouding the air. "Actually, I can do whatever I want with my own backyard," Sarah called back, not pausing in her work. "Checked with the city yesterday. No permits required for demolition on residential property under $50,000. The silence from the other side of the fence stretched long enough for Sarah to get in 3 more swings before Karen's voice returned, higher and more shrill than before. "This is going to destroy everyone's property values. You're being completely selfish." Sarah finally stopped, leaning on the sledgehammer handle as she caught her breath. The pool had been installed by the previous owners 15 years ago, and she'd inherited it along with the house when she'd moved in 3 years back. At first, she'd thought it would be nice, peaceful morning swims, summer barbecues, maybe even pool parties. That was before she'd met Karen Hoffman. Selfish. Sarah laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "That's rich coming from you. Don't you take that tone with me. I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years. I know how things work around here. There's a standard to maintain." The standard. Sarah had heard about Karen's famous standard from every neighbor on the block within her first week of moving in. How grass should be cut to exactly 2.5 inches. How garbage cans needed to be spotless and brought in within 4 hours of pickup. How certain flowers were inappropriate for front yard landscaping. How children shouldn't play outside after 7 p.m. because it was disturbing the peace. Sarah had tried to be a good neighbor at first. She'd nodded politely when Karen had helpfully pointed out that her azaleas were the wrong shade of pink for the neighborhood aesthetic. She'd bitten her tongue when Karen had left a printed list of community guidelines in her mailbox, guidelines that apparently gave Karen authority over everything from the color of Sarah's front door to the height of her fence. But the pool had been Karen's biggest obsession. "That water is a breeding ground for mosquitoes," Karen had declared during one of her unannounced backyard inspections, somehow having found a way through Sarah's locked gate. "And the filter system is too loud. It runs all night. It runs for 4 hours a day," Sarah had corrected. "During the afternoon. Well, it sounds like all night from my bedroom window." Sarah had installed additional soundproofing around the filter housing. Karen complained it was an eyesore. Sarah had planted hedges to block the view. Karen said they were the wrong species and would attract undesirable wildlife. When Sarah had finally snapped and told Karen to mind her own business, Karen had started documenting everything with her phone camera, muttering about evidence and legal action. The breaking point had come last month during Sarah's daughter Emma's 8th birthday party. Emma lived with her father most of the time, but Sarah got her every other weekend and most holidays. The pool party had been Emma's special request, just 5 little girls splashing around, laughing, having the kind of innocent fun that should have warmed anyone's heart. But not Karen's. She'd appeared at the fence in her bathrobe at exactly 3 p.m., phone in hand, recording video of the children playing. "This noise level violates the community quiet standards," she'd announced. "And I count 6 children in that pool. The maximum occupancy for a residential pool this size is 4. Sarah had felt something cold and dangerous settle in her chest as she watched her daughter's face crumple with embarrassment. The other parents had started gathering their kids early, shooting apologetic looks but clearly wanting to avoid whatever drama was brewing. "Get away from my fence," Sarah had said quietly. "Now. I have every right to document violations of community standards," Karen had shot back. "This affects all of us." That night, after Emma had cried herself to sleep asking why the neighbor lady hated them, Sarah had made her decision. The pool wasn't just a source of conflict, it was a weapon Karen used to make her life miserable. Every time Emma visited, Karen found something to complain about. The pool was too loud, too crowded, too something. But you couldn't complain about a pool that didn't exist. Now, standing in the wreckage of concrete and steel, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. Each swing of the sledgehammer was therapeutic, like breaking chains she hadn't even realized were binding her. "You can't do this without proper environmental assessment." Karen's voice had taken on a note of genuine panic. "That concrete could have asbestos. You're contaminating the groundwater." "Had it tested," Sarah grunted between swings. "All clear. The homeowners association will hear about this." "We don't have a homeowners association, Karen." "Well, we should. Someone needs to maintain standards around here." Sarah paused again, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. She could hear Karen pacing on the other side of the fence, her footsteps sharp and agitated on the decorative gravel she'd installed around her prize-winning rose garden. "You know what your problem is, Karen," Sarah called out. "You think you own this whole neighborhood. You think everyone else exists just to make your life more pleasant. I care about property values. I care about community standards. Someone has to. No, you care about control. There's a difference." The footsteps stopped. When Karen spoke again, her voice had dropped to the dangerously quiet tone that usually preceded her most vindictive actions. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Sarah Martinez. No idea at all." A chill ran down Sarah's spine despite the morning heat. She'd heard that tone before, right before Karen had somehow gotten Emma's birthday party shut down by calling in a noise complaint. Right before she'd reported Sarah's trash cans for being improperly positioned and gotten her a $50 city fine. Right before she'd called Child Protective Services with a completely fabricated story about unsafe conditions that had resulted in the most humiliating afternoon of Sarah's life as a social worker investigated her home. All the complaints had been dismissed, of course. But they'd cost Sarah time, money, and peace of mind. And Karen had seemed to enjoy every minute of it. "Actually," Sarah said, raising the sledgehammer again, "I think I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A bully who's gotten away with terrorizing this neighborhood for way too long. We'll see about that." The threat hung in the air like smoke as Karen's footsteps retreated toward her house. Sarah knew she should feel worried. Karen's retaliation was as predictable as sunrise. But instead, she felt a strange kind of peace. For once, she was the one taking action instead of just reacting to Karen's constant provocations. The sledgehammer came down again, and another chunk of concrete exploded into fragments. Sarah had researched pool removal extensively, watching YouTube videos and consulting with contractors. The work would take all weekend, but she had help coming. Her brother, Miguel, was arriving this afternoon with his truck and some power tools. Her best friend Lisa would be by tomorrow with lunch and moral support. Even Emma had begged to help, though Sarah had gently explained that 8-year-olds and sledgehammers didn't mix. By Sunday evening, the pool would be nothing but a memory, filled in with fresh topsoil and grass seed. And Karen would have to find something else to complain about. The morning wore on with steady progress. The shallow end was completely demolished by the time Sarah took her first break, sitting on the edge of what used to be the deep end with a bottle of water and a granola bar. The October sun had climbed higher, warming her face as she surveyed her work. It felt good. Destructive, maybe, but in the best possible way. Like cleaning out a closet full of old resentments and toxic memories. She was just getting back to work when she heard the distinctive wail. By the time Miguel arrived that afternoon with his truck full of power tools, Sarah had demolished most of the pool's shallow end and half the surrounding deck. Her brother took one look at the destruction and whistled low. "Damn, Hermana. You've been busy." He hefted a jackhammer from his truck bed. "This looks therapeutic." "More than you know," Sarah said, wiping sweat from her forehead. She filled him in on the morning's events while they worked, Miguel's expression growing darker with each detail. "So Karen's been running some kind of neighborhood scam." He paused in his work to look at the pristine house next door. "How long?" "You think this has been going on?" "According to my PI, at least 5 years. Maybe longer." Sarah pointed toward the street. "You see that blue house on the corner? The Hendersons lived there for 8 years before they suddenly sold last spring. Karen bought it 3 days after it went on the market, flipped it in 2 months, made a $60,000 profit." Miguel shook his head. "And let me guess, the Hendersons had kids. Twin boys, age 6. Karen complained constantly about their bikes on the sidewalk, their dog barking, their inappropriate outdoor toys. She called animal control on their golden retriever so many times that the Hendersons finally just gave up and moved to the suburbs." The jackhammer roared to life, drowning out conversation for the next hour. But Sarah's mind kept working, processing the information her investigator had uncovered. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Karen would identify families with children, then systematically harass them until they reached their breaking point. The complaints escalated in a predictable pattern: noise violations, property maintenance concerns, false reports to various authorities, and finally the nuclear option of calling Child Protective Services. Families would fight back at first. But the constant stress and fear of losing their children eventually wore them down. They'd sell quickly, often at below market value, desperate to escape. Karen would swoop in with cash offers, sometimes through shell companies to avoid suspicion. Quick cosmetic renovations, then back on the market at premium prices for childless couples or retirees who wouldn't draw her attention. It was brilliant in a sociopathic way. And completely illegal. The afternoon sun was starting to fade when Sarah heard footsteps on her front porch. She looked up to see Detective Rivera from the Fraud Division, a woman she'd met briefly during the morning's chaos. "Ms. Martinez, do you have a few minutes to talk?" Sarah set down her tools and nodded toward the back patio. Miguel continued working, but she could see him listening as they sat down. "We've been investigating your neighbor's business activities," Rivera said without preamble. "What you gave us this morning was very helpful, but we need more details." "What kind of details?" "Your private investigator found evidence of property manipulation, but we need victim testimony to build a solid case." "How many families has she targeted that you know of?" Sarah thought back through 3 years of neighborhood conversations. The Hendersons with the golden retriever. The Johnsons, they had a toddler who played in their front yard. Karen complained about the noise constantly. The Williams family moved out last year after Karen reported them for unsafe child supervision because their 10-year-old walked to school alone. All families with children. Every single one. She never bothers. The elderly couple on the other side of me, or the single professionals across the street. Just families. Rivera made notes. "We found something else interesting. Karen Hoffman has been claiming property tax exemptions for primary residents on 3 different houses." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "That's fraud. Federal fraud. The IRS tends to take that personally." Rivera closed her notebook. "We are going to need you to document any future contact she attempts." After today's arrest, she made bail within 4 hours. She might try to retaliate. As if summoned by the conversation, Karen's voice rang out from next door, not from her backyard, but from her driveway. Sarah couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably agitated. "Speak of the devil," Miguel muttered, switching off the jackhammer. Through the fence slats, Sarah could see shadows moving around Karen's garage. Multiple people, by the look of it, loading something into a vehicle. "She's moving fast," Rivera observed. "That's not usually a good sign." The shadows moved with urgency, and Sarah caught glimpses of boxes and filing cabinets being loaded into what looked like a rental truck. Karen was either covering her tracks or preparing to run. "Detective," Sarah said quietly, "what happens if she destroys evidence?" "We've already secured her financial records and business documents through court order. But personal communications, client lists, that kind of thing?" Rivera shrugged. "Harder to recover once it's gone." A new voice joined Karen's in the driveway, male, angry, getting progressively louder. Sarah couldn't make out words, but the tone suggested an argument. "Sounds like someone's not happy with Karen's business practices," Miguel observed. Rivera's radio crackled, and she stepped away to answer it. When she returned, her expression was grim. "We just got a call from another neighbor. Someone 3 blocks over who says Karen Hoffman has been systematically documenting their family's activities with telephoto lenses, taking pictures of their children in their own backyard." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "That's not property value manipulation. That's something else entirely." "Yeah. Something much worse." Rivera stood up. "I need to get back to the station. Keep documenting everything and call 911 if she approaches your property again." As Rivera left, the argument next door escalated. Sarah could now make out some of the male voice, something about promised returns and legal exposure. Someone Karen had been working with who was now cutting ties. The sun was setting by the time the rental truck pulled away, leaving Karen's house dark and eerily quiet. Sarah and Miguel worked by floodlight for another hour, making good progress on the deep end demolition. "You think she's gone for good?" Miguel asked as they packed up tools. Sarah looked toward the dark windows of Karen's house. "No. She's too invested in this neighborhood to just walk away. She'll be back." She was right. At 2:17 a.m., Sarah's security system chimed with a motion alert. She grabbed her phone and pulled up the camera feed, expecting to see a raccoon or stray cat. Instead, she saw Karen Hoffman creeping across her backyard in dark clothing, heading straight for the demolished pool. Sarah's first instinct was to call the police, but something made her pause. Karen was carrying what looked like a small bag, and her movements were deliberate, purposeful. She was up to something specific. Sarah slipped out of bed and crept to her back window, phone in hand, recording everything. Karen knelt beside the pool's exposed plumbing, pulling something from her bag. In the infrared glow of the security cameras, Sarah couldn't make out exactly what she was doing, but it involved tools and seemed to focus on the main water line. 20 minutes later, Karen disappeared back into the darkness, leaving no obvious trace of her visit. Sarah spent the rest of the night reviewing security footage and trying to figure out what Karen had been doing. The answer became clear at 6:30 a.m. when she went outside to continue the demolition work. Water was bubbling up from the ground where the main line connected to the city system. Not a lot, just a steady seep that was turning the surrounding soil into mud. Karen had sabotaged the water line. Sarah took pictures from every angle, then called the city water department. The repair technician who arrived 2 hours later confirmed what Sarah had suspected. "Someone deliberately damaged this coupling," he said, showing her the loosened connection. "Probably happened sometime last night, judging by how much water's accumulated." "Can you fix it?" "Sure, but you're looking at emergency repair rates. Weekend call, plus the damage to surrounding property." He consulted his tablet. "About $1,800. Sarah nodded grimly and pulled out her credit card. Karen's retaliation was escalating, but she was also getting sloppy. Every move was being documented, every vengeful act building the case against her. The water technician was just finishing up when Lisa arrived with coffee and pastries, as promised. Sarah's best friend took one look at the muddy mess and the fresh security camera footage and shook her head. This woman has completely lost it, Lisa said. You need to stay somewhere else tonight. I'm not letting her drive me out of my own home. Sarah, she's escalating. Property damage, trespassing in the middle of the night, what's next? Before Sarah could answer, Miguel's truck pulled into the driveway. He got out looking grim, his phone pressed to his ear. Yeah, I understand. No police report yet. We'll handle it. He ended the call and walked over to them. We have a problem. What now? Someone called my boss this morning. Anonymous tip about me doing unpermitted electrical work on residential properties. The city's sending an inspector to check my licenses and review all my current jobs. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Karen wasn't just targeting her anymore, she was going after anyone who helped her. Miguel, I'm so sorry. I never thought, it's not your fault. But his jaw was tight with anger. She's trying to destroy my business because I'm helping you demolish that pool. Lisa set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. She's going after your family now. Sarah, this has to stop. It will stop. Mrs. Chen arrived at Sarah's house at exactly 7 a.m. Monday morning, stepping out of a sleek black sedan that whispered money and influence. She was smaller than Sarah had expected, barely 5 feet tall, probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. But her eyes were sharp as laser points, and when she shook Sarah's hand, her grip was surprisingly firm. Thank you for calling, she said without preamble. I've been waiting 3 years for someone brave enough to stand up to that monster. They sat in Sarah's kitchen while Miguel finished the last of the pool demolition outside. Through the window, they could see Karen's house, still dark, still seemingly empty, though Sarah's security cameras had recorded her returning around 4 a.m. Tell me about your connection to Karen, Sarah said, pouring coffee. Mrs. Chen's expression hardened. She destroyed my grandson's family. Tommy and Jennifer lived 2 streets over until last year. They had a beautiful little girl, Mylin, only 4 years old. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Another family with children. Karen targeted them the same way she targeted you, Mrs. Chen continued. Started with complaints about their landscaping, said. Jennifer's vegetable garden was inappropriate for the neighborhood aesthetic. Then it escalated to noise complaints about Mylin playing in their own backyard. Let me guess, she called CPS 3 times. Mrs. Chen's voice was deadly quiet. Claimed she saw signs of neglect, unsanitary conditions, parental drug use. All lies, but each investigation was more intrusive than the last. Mylin started having nightmares about being taken away from her parents. Sarah watched the older woman's hands tremble slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. The pain in her eyes was familiar, the same helpless rage Sarah had felt watching Emma's face crumble at her ruined birthday party. The final straw was when Karen claimed she witnessed Tommy physically disciplining Mylin in their backyard. She provided video footage to CPS. Video footage of what? Tommy teaching his daughter to ride her bike. She fell off, scraped her knee, and he picked her up to comfort her. But Karen edited the footage to make it look like he was grabbing her roughly, hurting her deliberately. Mrs. Chen's voice cracked. A 4-year-old child, learning to ride a bike, and that woman turned it into evidence of child abuse. Sarah closed her eyes. The depths of Karen's cruelty kept surprising her, even now. CPS believed the video at first. They removed Mylin from the home pending investigation. Mrs. Chen pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a photo, a beautiful little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. She spent 2 weeks in foster care while the case was being reviewed. 2 weeks of my great-granddaughter crying herself to sleep, asking when Mama and Daddy were coming to get her. But they got her back. Eventually. The investigation cleared Tommy and Jennifer completely. The video analysis revealed Karen's editing. But by then, the damage was done. Mylin was traumatized. Jennifer had a nervous breakdown. Tommy lost his job because he'd missed so much work dealing with court dates and meetings with social workers. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. This was what Karen had been trying to do to her, not just harassment, but complete destruction of everything that mattered. They sold the house. Had to. Couldn't afford the mortgage after Tommy lost his job, and they were too afraid to stay anyway. Karen had won. Mrs. Chen leaned forward. But she made one crucial mistake. What? She bragged about it. At the closing, Karen was there with her cash offer, ready to snatch up their house for $60,000 under market value. She told Tommy that this was what happened to people who didn't respect community standards. Said she'd taught the neighborhood a valuable lesson about maintaining property values. Sarah frowned. But Tommy couldn't prove anything with just her word. Tommy couldn't. But I could. Mrs. Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. You see, I might be retired, but I spent 40 years as a federal prosecutor. I know how to build a case. The pieces started clicking together in Sarah's mind. You've been investigating her. For 3 years. Every property transaction, every business record, every permit application. I've documented her entire operation. Mrs. Chen pulled out an iPad and showed Sarah a complex flowchart of interconnected documents. Shell companies, fraudulent tax filings, witness intimidation, filing false police reports. I have evidence of 17 different felonies spanning 5 years. Why didn't you turn her in before now? Because I needed a current victim willing to testify. Someone she was actively targeting who could document her methods in real time. Mrs. Chen's eyes glittered. Someone like you. Sarah looked out at her backyard, where Miguel was loading the last chunks of concrete into his truck. What do you need from me? Everything you have. Security footage, police reports, documentation of property damage, records of her harassment. But more than that, I need you to let her keep digging her own grave. What do you mean? Mrs. Chen pulled up another screen on her iPad, showing what looked like financial records. Karen has been getting sloppy. Desperate. Her operation depends on a steady stream of property flips to maintain cash flow, but the neighborhood is running out of families to target. She's expanded her hunting ground, but that's made her visible to federal agencies. Federal agencies. IRS, FBI, HUD. When you're committing fraud across multiple jurisdictions and using the mail system to file false documents, it becomes a federal matter very quickly. Mrs. Chen's smile grew wider. Karen doesn't know it yet, but she's been under federal investigation for 8 months. Sarah felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. So she's going down either way. Eventually. But I want to make sure she goes down hard. I want every charge that will stick, every victim who can testify, every piece of evidence that will put her away for long enough that she can never hurt another family. Mrs. Chen's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I want justice for Mylene. And for Emma. And for every other child who was terrorized by that woman's sick need for control. They were interrupted by a commotion from next door, car doors slamming. Raised voices, the sound of something heavy being dragged across pavement. Sarah peered through the kitchen window and saw Karen's silver Mercedes in the driveway, along with a white van and 2 men in coveralls. She's back, Sarah murmured. Mrs. Chen moved to the window with surprising quickness. And she's making another mistake. Those men are installing security cameras, expensive ones, from the look of it. Why is that a mistake? Because installing surveillance equipment aimed at neighboring properties requires permits and notification. And because Karen just spent the weekend destroying evidence and fleeing potential arrest, behavior that suggests consciousness of guilt. Mrs. Chen pulled out her phone. Detective Rivera needs to see this. While Mrs. Chen made the call, Sarah watched Karen directing the installation with manic energy. The cameras were being positioned to have clear sight lines into Sarah's backyard, her windows, even the front door. It was an intimidation tactic, but also something more disturbing. Sarah, Mrs. Chen said quietly, hanging up her phone. Detective Rivera just told me something interesting. Karen's arrest on Saturday wasn't her first encounter with police. What do you mean? 3 months ago, she was questioned in connection with a stalking case. A single mother across town reported that someone was taking pictures of her children at school, following her to work, leaving threatening notes. The police couldn't prove it was Karen, but it fits the pattern. Exactly. Karen's obsession. With controlling families, documenting their activities, using their children as pressure points, it goes beyond property manipulation. She's escalating into full stalking behavior. Outside, Karen was now standing in her yard with binoculars, making no attempt to hide the fact that she was watching Sarah's house. The installation crew continued working, mounting cameras that looked more suited to a federal prison than a suburban neighborhood. She's completely lost it, Sarah said. Good. Desperate people make stupid mistakes. Mrs. Chen checked her watch. Detective Rivera will be here in 20 minutes. In the meantime, I need you to call your private investigator. There's one more piece of this puzzle I need confirmed. What piece? The night Mylene was removed from her parents' home, someone called in a false emergency report about a child being beaten. The call came from a prepaid phone, but the location data puts the caller in this neighborhood. Mrs. Chen's eyes were hard as granite. I think Karen has been using false emergency calls to trigger immediate CPS responses. It's attempted kidnapping through government proxy. The implications of this hit Sarah like a physical blow. Emma could have been taken in the middle of the night, ripped from her bed by well-meaning social workers responding to Karen's fabricated emergency. How do we prove it? Your PI found evidence that Karen has been purchasing prepaid phones in bulk. If we can connect even one of those phones to a false emergency call, we have her for filing false police reports, misuse of emergency services, and conspiracy to deprive constitutional rights. Mrs. Chen's smile was predatory. That last one is a federal civil rights violation. 20 years minimum. Miguel came in from the backyard, wiping his hands on a towel. Pool's completely gone, he announced, then stopped when he saw their expressions. What's wrong? Sarah quickly filled him. 3 days passed in blissful quiet. Sarah spent them filling the pool crater with topsoil, planting grass seed, and enjoying the strange peace of a neighborhood without Karen's toxic presence. Miguel's contractor license was reinstated after. The fraudulent permits were traced back to Karen's IP address. Even Emma called to say she was excited about having a real backyard for their next visit. It felt too good to be true. It was. Thursday morning, Sarah woke to the sound of her security system going haywire, motion alerts, door sensors, window alarms all triggering simultaneously. She grabbed her phone and pulled up the camera feeds, expecting to see a technical malfunction. Instead, she saw Karen Hoffman standing in her backyard at 5:47 a.m., holding a crowbar and methodically smashing every security camera she could reach. Sarah's blood went ice cold. Karen wasn't just back, she was completely unhinged. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them, and her movements had the jerky, frantic quality of someone operating on pure adrenaline and very little sleep. Sarah dialed 911 while creeping to her bedroom window for a better view. Karen had moved on from the cameras to Sarah's newly planted grass, tearing up chunks of sod and hurling them at the house with manic fury. This is what happens. Karen screamed at the dark windows. This is what happens when you try to destroy me. 911, what's your emergency? This is Sarah Martinez at 1247 Elm Street. My neighbor is trespassing on my property and destroying my belongings. She's armed with a crowbar and appears to be having some kind of breakdown. Units are en route. Are you safe inside your home? Sarah was about to answer when she heard the distinctive sound of breaking glass from downstairs. Karen had thrown something through her kitchen window. She just broke into my house, Sarah whispered into the phone. She's inside. Stay on the line. Do not confront the intruder. Find a secure location and wait for officers to arrive. Sarah crept toward her bedroom door, straining to hear movement downstairs. The house was eerily quiet for several minutes, then she heard Karen's voice, much closer now, coming from the living room directly below. I know you're here, Sarah. I know you're listening. Karen's voice was different, calmer, but with an underlying tremor that was somehow more terrifying than her earlier screaming. 3 years I spent building something perfect. 3 years of careful planning, maintaining standards, creating value. And you destroyed it all in one weekend. Sarah could hear footsteps now, moving through her house with deliberate slowness. Kitchen to living room to hallway. You think you're so clever, don't you? Getting that old Chinese bitch involved, recording our conversation, making me look like some kind of criminal. The footsteps paused at the bottom of the stairs. But you made one crucial mistake, Sarah. You assumed I had something to lose. You assumed I cared about consequences. The first stair creaked under Karen's weight. The thing is, when you've lost everything, your business, your reputation, your entire life's work, there's a certain freedom in having nothing left to protect. Second stair. Third stair. Sarah pressed herself against her bedroom door, phone clutched to her chest. The 911 operator was still talking, but she couldn't risk responding now. I've been thinking about our situation for 3 days, Karen continued, her voice getting closer with each word. Hiding in a motel room, watching the news reports about my criminal enterprise, listening to my lawyer explain how I'm going to spend the next 20 years in federal prison. Fourth stair. Fifth stair. And I realized something important. If I'm going down anyway, I might as well make it count. Sarah could see Karen's shadow now, moving along the hallway outside her door. The crowbar scraped against the wall as she walked. You destroyed my life, Sarah. So I'm going to destroy yours. Starting with that precious little daughter of yours. Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Emma. Karen was threatening Emma. Oh yes, I know all about Emma's schedule. Every other weekend, right? This weekend, actually. She'll be here tomorrow evening for your custody visit. The doorknob turned slowly. Such a shame if something happened to her. If she had an accident while playing in your newly renovated backyard. Maybe fell into that hole where your pool used to be. Maybe got hurt by some of the construction debris you haven't cleaned up yet. The door cracked open. These things happen, you know. Children get hurt. Especially when their mothers don't supervise them properly. Sarah saw Karen's face appear in the gap, wild eyes, manic smile, the crowbar raised in her right hand. Hello. Sarah. Sarah threw herself backward as the crowbar crashed through the space where her head had been a second before. She rolled across her bed and came up on the other side, putting the furniture between herself and Karen. You're insane, Sarah gasped. I'm practical, Karen corrected, advancing around the bed. You cost me everything. Now you're going to pay everything. She swung the crowbar again, splintering Sarah's nightstand. Sarah dodged and ran for the hallway, but Karen was faster than she looked. The crowbar caught Sarah across the shoulder, sending her spinning into the wall. Pain exploded down her arm, but adrenaline kept her moving. She stumbled down the stairs with Karen right behind her, the crowbar whistling past her ear as she ducked. You can't run forever. Karen shrieked. And even if you get away, I know where Emma goes to school. I know her father's address. I know everywhere she's ever been. Sarah hit the front door at full speed, fumbling with the locks as Karen's footsteps pounded down the stairs behind her. The deadbolt finally turned, and Sarah burst outside just as police sirens became audible in the distance. But Karen wasn't done. She followed Sarah onto the front lawn, crowbar raised, her face twisted with 3 years of accumulated rage. This ends here. Karen screamed. All of it ends here. She brought the crowbar down in a vicious arc aimed at Sarah's skull. Sarah threw herself sideways, landing hard on the concrete driveway as the weapon smashed into the ground where she'd been standing. You think the police can protect you? Karen panted, raising the crowbar again. You think your lawyer can protect you? You think that federal prosecutor can protect you? The sirens were getting closer, but not close enough. Nobody can protect you from me. Nobody can. The crowbar never completed its descent. A taser's electrical surge dropped Karen like a stone, her body convulsing as 50,000 volts coursed through her nervous system. Detective Rivera stood at the edge of Sarah's driveway, taser still extended, her face grim with professional satisfaction. Karen Hoffman, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, breaking and entering, destruction of property, and making terroristic threats. She looked down at Karen's twitching form. And that's just the local charges. The federal indictment came through this morning. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt behind Rivera's unmarked sedan, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. But the threat was over. Karen lay on the ground, still conscious but completely incapacitated, staring up at the morning sky with the blank expression of someone whose world had just collapsed completely. "Are you hurt?" Rivera asked Sarah, helping her to her feet. "My shoulder," Sarah managed, testing her range of motion. "But I'll live. Ambulance is en route. Let's get you checked out." Rivera knelt beside Karen, who was now conscious enough to glare with undimmed hatred. "As for you, Ms. Hoffman, you've just graduated from white-collar crime to attempted murder. Hope the revenge was worth it." Karen's mouth moved, but only a croak came out. The fight had gone out of her as completely as if someone had pulled a plug. Mrs. Chen arrived as the paramedics were examining Sarah's shoulder, her sedan pulling up just as Karen was being loaded into an ambulance under armed guard. "I heard the call on my police scanner," she said, hurrying over to Sarah. "Are you all right?" "I think so. Bruised, but nothing's broken." "And Karen?" Sarah looked toward the ambulance, where Karen was now handcuffed to a gurney, staring at nothing with hollow eyes. "I think she finally broke," Sarah said quietly. "Completely." Detective Rivera finished talking to the other officers and walked back over to them. "She's not getting out this time," she said. "Between the federal charges Mrs. Chen built and what happened here today, she's looking at life without parole." "What about the federal case?" 17 counts of mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, and tax evasion. That's before we add the new charges from this morning. Rivera's smile was sharp. The U.S. attorney called it one of the most elaborate neighborhood terror schemes they've ever prosecuted. Mrs. Chen pulled out her iPad and showed them a news article that had just gone live. "It's already making national news. Suburban terrorist uses legal system to steal children and property." Sarah read the first few paragraphs, her eyes widening as she saw the scope of the investigation. Karen's operation had affected 12 families across 3 states, with estimated damages in the millions. But more than that, the psychological trauma to the children involved was finally being recognized as the systematic abuse it had always been. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now you testify," Rivera said. "Help us put her away forever. And then you get your life back." As the ambulance pulled away with Karen inside, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years: complete, overwhelming relief. Not the temporary peace of Karen's absence, but tea. Sarah stood in her backyard, watching Emma chase butterflies across the green lawn that had grown where the pool used to be. The grass was thick and healthy now, showing no trace of the concrete crater that had once dominated the space. In the corner where the pool equipment had been, Sarah had planted a small garden: tomatoes, peppers, herbs that Emma loved to help water. "Mom, look!" Emma called out, pointing to a monarch butterfly that had landed on the basil plant. "It's so pretty." "Beautiful," Sarah agreed, marveling at how much had changed in half a year. The neighborhood felt different now, lighter, like a heavy blanket had been lifted from the entire street. The Hendersons had moved back into their blue house after Mrs. Chen helped them buy it back from Karen's shell company at a fair price. Their golden retriever was currently napping in a patch of sunlight, no longer afraid of phantom noise complaints. Miguel's truck pulled into the driveway, followed by a car Sarah didn't recognize. Her brother got out first, grinning widely, then opened the passenger door for Mrs. Chen. The older woman moved more slowly these days, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Chen called out. "I brought someone I'd like you to meet." The unknown car's doors opened, and a young Asian couple emerged with a little girl who looked about 4 years old. The child had pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. That Sarah recognized from photos. "Mylin?" Sarah asked softly. The little girl nodded shyly, then ran to Mrs. Chen and wrapped her arms around her great-grandmother's legs. "Tommy and Jennifer wanted to thank you," Mrs. Chen said, her voice thick with emotion. The restitution from Karen's conviction allowed them to move back to the area. They bought a house 3 blocks away. Tommy Chen, a tall, gentle-looking man in his 30s, stepped forward and shook Sarah's hand. We can never repay what you did for our family, he said. Mylene has been sleeping through the night again for the first time in 2 years. His wife Jennifer wiped tears from her eyes. The therapy helped, but I think what really healed her was knowing that the bad lady could never hurt anyone again. Emma had stopped chasing butterflies and was now standing near the adults, listening with the intense focus children brought to conversations they sensed were important. Are you Mylene? Emma asked the younger girl. Mylene nodded again, still shy but curious. I'm Emma. The bad lady used to be mean to me too. But she can't be mean anymore. Why not? Mylene asked in a small voice. Because my mom and Mrs. Chen and the police made sure she went to timeout forever. Mylene's eyes widened. Forever timeout. Forever and ever, Emma confirmed with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old. Want to see my mom's garden? We have butterflies. As the girls ran off toward the flower beds, the adults settled on Sarah's new patio furniture, another improvement made possible by not having to maintain a pool. How's the federal case proceeding? Sarah asked Mrs. Chen. Sentencing is next month. The prosecutor is confident she'll get life without parole. Mrs. Chen's smile was satisfied but sad. 17 families testified at the hearing. The judge called it one of the most systematic campaigns of domestic terrorism he'd ever encountered. Miguel pulled out his phone and showed them a news article. She made CNN again yesterday. They are calling it the suburban predator case. Apparently, there are copycat investigators in 3 other states looking for similar patterns. Sarah shook her head. I still can't believe how far it went. How many families she destroyed. But how many she'll never destroy again, Jennifer added quietly. That's what matters now. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children explore the garden. Mylene's laughter was like music, free and uninhibited in a way that spoke of healing completed. There's something else, Mrs. Chen said eventually. Something I wanted to discuss with all of you. She pulled out a thick folder from her purse. The Victims' Restitution Fund has a substantial surplus after covering everyone's damages. The families have been discussing what to do with the remaining money. What kind of surplus? Sarah asked. Just over $2 million. Karen's property portfolio was more extensive than we initially realized. Mrs. Chen's eyes glittered. We want to establish a foundation. What kind of foundation? Legal aid for families targeted by harassment and fraudulent complaints. Therapy. Services for children traumatized by false CPS reports. Training programs for social workers and police to recognize signs of manipulative reporting. Mrs. Chen leaned forward. We want to make sure no other family goes through what we did. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. Jennifer and I have been working with a child psychologist who specializes in system trauma. There are hundreds of cases like ours that never get proper attention because the abuse is so subtle. And we want you to chair the foundation, Mrs. Chen added, looking directly at Sarah. Sarah blinked in surprise. Me? I'm not qualified to. You're the one who stood up when it mattered, Mrs. Chen interrupted. You're the one who documented everything, fought back, and refused to be driven away. If anyone understands what these families need, it's you. Think about it, Miguel added. You could help people like us. Families who don't know how to fight back against someone using the system against them. Sarah looked out at Emma and Mylene, who were now sitting in the grass making flower chains. 2 little girls who should never have had to learn what false reports and court hearings meant, but who were healing together in the sunshine. What would it involve? She asked finally. Part-time, mostly remote work. Reviewing cases, connecting families with resources, advocating for policy changes. Mrs. Chen smiled. And occasionally testifying before Congress about the need for stronger penalties for filing false reports against families. Congress. There's a bill being introduced next month, the Karen Hoffman Act, they are calling it informally. It would create federal penalties for systematic harassment through false reporting and provide training funds for agencies to identify patterns of abuse. Mrs. Chen's smile widened. They want you to testify in support. Sarah felt a flutter of something that might have been excitement. I've never testified before Congress. You testified against Karen better than any prosecutor could have hoped, Jennifer said. You have a gift for making people understand what this kind of abuse does to families. Mom. Emma called from the garden. Can Mylene come to my birthday party next month? We want to have it in the backyard. Sarah looked at the space where her pool used to be, now green and peaceful and perfect for a children's party. No one would complain about the noise. No one would document violations or call authorities or threaten the safety of children who just wanted to play. Of course, sweetie, she called back. We'll have the best backyard party ever. With butterflies? Mylene asked hopefully. With lots of butterflies. As if summoned by the promise, another monarch butterfly landed on the herb garden, its orange and black wings catching the afternoon light. Then another. And another. Migration season, Mrs. Chen observed. They are heading south for the winter. Sarah watched the butterflies dance among the plants she and Emma had chosen together, resilient varieties that would come back stronger each year. Like the neighborhood. Like the families that were slowly healing. Like the little girls who were learning to trust the world again. I'll do it, she said quietly. The foundation, the testimony, all of it. Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand. Karen thought she was destroying you. But she just helped you discover how strong you really are. We all did, Tommy added. Every family. She targeted everyone who stood up to testify. We are all stronger now than we were before. Miguel raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To Karen Hoffman. The worst neighbor in history, but the best motivation for change. They all laughed, even Emma and Mylene, though the girls didn't understand what was funny. They were too busy chasing butterflies and planning party games and being exactly what children should be, carefree and happy and safe. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion. The pool was gone, but her backyard was more beautiful than it had ever been. Karen was gone, but the neighborhood was stronger and more connected than it had ever been. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with justice. But the best ones end with healing. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they end with butterflies in your garden and children's laughter in your backyard and the absolute certainty that the people you love are safe. Sarah had torn down her pool to spite a neighbor. She'd ended up building something much more important, a community, a foundation, and a future where Karen Hoffman's name would be remembered not for the families she destroyed, but for the protection she'd inadvertently created for all the families who came after. The butterflies danced in the evening light, and Emma's laughter rang across the yard, and Sarah Martinez finally understood what peace felt like. It felt like home.